My name is Melanie, and I'm a student. For most of my life, my primary unspoken and unpaid profession was that of a housekeeper, a maid, a silent servant in my own home. My successes, well. For a long time, my greatest success was simply surviving. Surviving the cold indifference, the relentless chores, and the crushing weight of being the invisible child. But I just discovered the real reason why my mother destroyed my childhood, and it's worse than I ever imagined. They thought I'd never uncover the truth about the invisible cage they built around me, but they underestimated the power of a desperate heart. For years, I lived with a gnawing emptiness, a feeling of being fundamentally flawed. I'd look in the mirror and wonder what was so wrong with me that my own mother could look at me with such disdain, while my older sister Sarah basked in the warmth of her unwavering affection. I now know that the reflection I saw wasn't the problem. The mirror itself, the one my mother held up to me, Penny, was warped by a poison. I'm only just beginning to understand. There are so many secrets buried in the foundations of my family. Multiple truths that will be revealed, each one more shocking than the last. I'm sharing this not for pity, but because I know I'm not alone. If you've ever experienced feeling like a ghost in your own family, if you've ever been systematically broken down by the people who were supposed to build you up, comment and subscribe. You need to hear this. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a harsh reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones who share our blood. Trust me, if you're someone who believes in justice and the strength of the human spirit, this story will change how you see family forever. To understand the chasm that defined my childhood, you need to understand my family. We lived in a perfectly average suburban house on a perfectly average street. From the outside, we were the picture of a happy, normal family. But inside those walls, a very different story was being written. A story where I was the unwilling protagonist in a drama of neglect and manipulation. My father, James, is an entrepreneur. A good man, I believe, but one whose ambition often kept him away from home. He traveled frequently for work, chasing deals and building his business, all he said, to provide for us. And he did provide in a material sense. We never lacked for anything tangible. But his absence created a vacuum, a space where my mother's darker nature could flourish unchecked. My mother, Sharon, was a stay-at-home mom. She had a smile for the outside world, a carefully constructed facade of maternal warmth and wifely devotion. But behind closed doors, that smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating cruelty, especially when directed at me. She was the primary antagonist in my life, a manipulator of the highest order. She had this uncanny ability to twist words, to rewrite history, to make you doubt your own sanity. Then there was Sarah, my older sister. Sarah was the golden child, the sun around which my mother's world revolved. She was pretty popular and effortlessly charming, or so my mother made her out to be. My mother doted on her, showering her with praise gifts and affection. Sarah, in turn, learned quickly to play her part, soaking up the favoritism and often joining in my mother's dismissal of me. It wasn't always overt aggression from Sarah. Sometimes it was a subtle look, a smirk, a way of echoing our mother's disdain that cut just as deep. The reason for my mother's animosity towards me was for a long time a mystery. I was just me. Quieter than Sarah, perhaps more introspective. I didn't demand attention, mostly because I learned early on that any attention I received from my mother would likely be negative. Later, I'd learn the twisted truth. I looked like my paternal grandmother, a woman my mother despised and had systematically alienated from our family years ago. I was a living, breathing reminder of a perceived enemy. My paternal grandmother, I barely knew her. I had faint, fragmented memories of a kind woman with warm hands and a gentle smile from when I was very, very young. Then she was gone from our lives. My mother would speak of her in hushed, venomous tones, painting her as a meddling, evil woman. My father, caught in my mother's web, grew distant from his own mother. I often wondered about her, this ghost in our family tree, this woman I supposedly resembled. On the other side were my maternal grandparents. They were frequent visitors, especially when my father was away. They weren't overtly cruel like my mother, but they were complicit. They saw the blatant favoritism, the way I was treated like a servant while Sarah was pampered. They heard the way my mother spoke to me, but they never intervened. They'd offer me a pitying glance sometimes or a hollow, forced smile, but their loyalty lay firmly with their daughter Sharon. They too, I realized later, had been poisoned against me by my mother's insidious whispers. The favoritism started early, so early that it became the wallpaper of my existence. I remember one birthday I must have been around 7. I'd hoped for a particular doll, the one all my friends had. I'd even whispered it to my father on one of his rare calls home. Sarah, whose birthday was a month before mine, had received a lavish party and a mountain of gifts. My birthday was a quiet affair, a small, lopsided cake baked by me under my mother's critical supervision. The doll never materialized. Instead, my mother handed me a set of new cleaning cloths. "You're getting old enough to be more useful around the house, Melanie." She'd said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Sarah got a new bike that year, even though she already had one. Another time in 3rd grade, I won a school-wide art competition. I was so proud. I'd worked on my painting for weeks, pouring all my childish creativity onto the canvas. I brought home the certificate and the small trophy, my heart pounding with excitement. My father was away as usual. I showed it to my mother. She glanced at it, her lips curling into a faint sneer. "Art. What good is that? Focus on your chores, Melanie. Your sister got an A in math. That's something to be proud of." Sarah hadn't even liked math. She'd complained endlessly about the tutor my mother had hired for her. My little trophy ended up gathering dust in the back of my closet. My potential, my small flicker of talent, was snuffed out before it even had a chance to ignite. School lunches were another daily reminder of my place. Sarah would get carefully packed lunches with sandwiches cut into cute shapes, fruit salads, and little notes from Mom. I usually got leftovers or a plain sandwich I had to make myself in the morning rush after finishing my chores. If I forgot or didn't have time, I went hungry. My mother would tell my father that she spent hours preparing healthy lunches for both her girls. The injustice wasn't just in material things or overt praise. It was in the casual cruelty, the constant belittling. If I spilled something, I was clumsy and useless. If Sarah spilled something, it was an accident and Mom would rush to clean it up, cooing, "Oh, sweetie, don't worry about it." If I was sick, I was exaggerating, seeking attention, and still expected to do my chores. If Sarah had a sniffle, she was confined to bed, pampered with soup and movies. I remember once I was about 10 and I developed a nasty cough. My mother insisted I was faking it to get out of cleaning the bathrooms. I coughed so hard my chest ached, but I scrubbed the tiles, tears stinging my eyes. That night my father called. My mother, in her sweetest voice, told him how she'd spent the day nursing me, making me special tea, and keeping me comfortable. I stood there listening to her lies, a cold knot of despair tightening in my stomach. That was the moment I think I truly understood the depth of her deception. My early signs of potential were consistently ignored. I loved reading devouring books from the school library. I was a good student despite the exhaustion from my chores and the emotional turmoil. But my mother never asked about my books, never attended parent-teacher meetings unless forced by my father's rare direct request, and dismissed my good grades as just what's expected. Sarah's B's and C's, however, were often met with, "She's trying her best and she has so many social commitments." These memories aren't just isolated incidents. They are the threads that wove the tapestry of my childhood, a tapestry of neglect, injustice, and a desperate, unfulfilled longing for a mother's love. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to expect nothing. It was a lonely existence, punctuated by the hollow echo of my mother's favoritism and the aching silence of my father's absence. And what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a long, dark road. The years between childhood and my late teens were a blur of repeating cycles of disappointment. Each new milestone, each small spark of hope that things might change, was inevitably extinguished by the suffocating blanket of my mother's disdain and my sister's privileged position. It was a pattern etched into the very fabric of our family life, a relentless rhythm of injustice that wore down my spirit. Milestone moments were particularly painful. My 8th grade graduation, for instance. I'd worked hard earning a special commendation for academic improvement. I remember feeling a flicker of pride, a naive hope that perhaps this time my mother would acknowledge me. Sarah, who was in high school by then, had her own set of achievements, mostly social, that Mom never tired of broadcasting. For my graduation, my father was predictably on a business trip. My mother attended reluctantly. She sat through the ceremony with a bored expression scrolling through her phone. When my name was called for the commendation, there was no applause from her, no smile. Afterwards, while other parents hugged their children and took pictures, she simply said, "All right, let's go. I have errands to run." Sarah, who had come along, spent the entire time texting her friends, occasionally rolling her eyes in my direction. Later that evening, Sarah showed Mom a new dress she wanted, and Mom immediately agreed to buy it, praising Sarah's excellent taste. My commendation certificate lay forgotten on the kitchen counter. My 16th birthday was another such occasion, a milestone that most teenagers eagerly anticipate. I didn't expect a lavish party like Sarah had, but a small gesture, a sign that I mattered, would have meant the world. Instead, I woke up to a longer list of chores than usual. My mother claimed she was too busy to do anything special. She'd spent the previous week planning a spa day for Sarah just because Sarah had felt stressed about an upcoming school dance. I spent my 16th birthday scrubbing floors and cleaning windows, the silence in the house amplifying the ache in my heart. My father called, wished me a happy birthday, and promised a gift when he returned. The gift, when it came weeks later, was a generic gift card, likely chosen by my mother. My academic achievements were consistently dismissed. I loved history, and I excelled in it. I'd spend hours in the library, losing myself in stories of the past. My history teacher, Mrs. Bennett, noticed my passion and encouraged me. She was one of the few adults in my life who saw me, who believed in my potential. But at home, my A's in history were met with history. What are you going to do with that? Sarah is taking advanced chemistry. That's a subject for a serious student. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled through her classes, often needing expensive tutors, yet my mother would proudly tell everyone how academically gifted she was. It was maddening. Her mediocre efforts were not just celebrated, they were embellished, magnified, presented as triumphs of intellect and perseverance. My internal monologue during those years was a dark and twisted thing. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am useless. Maybe there's something inherently unlovable about me. The constant devaluation chipped away at my self-esteem, leaving me riddled with self-doubt. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, a silent observer of a family that didn't truly include me. The psychological impact was profound, a slow poisoning of my sense of self. Dialogue scenes from that time are seared into my memory. I remember one evening I was about 15 struggling with a particularly difficult math assignment. I'd been up late the night before, forced to do a deep clean of the kitchen after Sarah had hosted a party and left a mess. "Mom, could you maybe help me with this problem?" I asked tentatively, holding out my textbook. She didn't even look up from her magazine. "Melanie, don't be ridiculous. I'm not a math tutor. Besides, you should be able to figure it out yourself if you paid more attention in class instead of daydreaming." "I do pay attention," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's just, this chapter is hard." Sarah sauntered in, then phone pressed to her ear, laughing. "Oh, Mom, guess what Chad just asked me to the prom." "Isn't that amazing?" Mom's face lit up. "Oh, darling, that's wonderful. We'll have to find you the most beautiful dress. We can go shopping this weekend." She completely ignored me, her attention solely on Sarah. I quietly retreated to my room, the unsolved math problem a metaphor for my life. Another time, my father was home for a rare weekend. I'd plucked up the courage to talk to him about the workload. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "Mom makes me do a lot of chores. All the cleaning, the laundry. It's hard to keep up with schoolwork." Before my father could respond, my mother jumped in, her voice dripping with false concern. "James, darling, Melanie is exaggerating. She does a few light chores just to teach her responsibility. You know how teenagers can be always trying to get out of helping around the house." She gave me a look, a silent threat that I knew all too well. My father, ever trusting, ever eager to avoid conflict during his short stays, just nodded. Well, a little responsibility is good, Melanie. Your mother knows best. He patted my shoulder, oblivious to the despair in my eyes. The conversation was over before it even began. My mother shot me a triumphant smirk when he wasn't looking. It was during these trying years that Mrs. Bennett, my history teacher, became a quiet beacon of support. She was a kind, observant woman in her late 50s with intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than I let on. She noticed my fatigue in class, my occasional unpreparedness, which was so unlike my usual diligent self. She didn't pry, but she offered extensions on assignments when I seemed overwhelmed and always had an encouraging word for me. She was the first adult who made me feel like I wasn't entirely invisible. The most recent major disappointment, the one that pushed me closer to the edge, happened just a few months ago at the beginning of my senior year. It was college application season. I'd secretly been dreaming of applying to a university out of state, a place where I could study history, and more importantly, escape my mother's suffocating presence. I'd worked hard to maintain good grades despite everything. I needed my father's signature on some financial aid forms. I waited for a moment when my mother was out with Sarah. I called my father, explained the forms, and emailed them to him. He promised to look them over and sign them. A few days later, I asked my mother if a package had arrived from Dad. Oh, that, she said, her voice casual. Yes, it came. But James and I discussed it. That university is too far away, and frankly, Melanie, it's not for someone like you. We've decided you'll apply to the local community college. It's more suitable. My heart plummeted. But Dad said he'd sign the forms. Did he really say that? Of course he did. She lied smoothly. He agrees with me. It's for the best. I knew deep down that she had manipulated him again. Intercepted the forms, twisted the narrative. The dream of escape of a future I chose for myself crumbled into dust. That night, I cried myself to sleep, a familiar ache of hopelessness consuming me. Little did I know this crushing disappointment was a prelude to a storm that would finally shatter the suffocating calm of my carefully controlled world. The disappointment over the university application was a turning point. It ignited a spark of defiance in me, a desperate need to break free from the suffocating grip of my mother's control. The abuse and workload, which had always been relentless, escalated further in the following months, pushing me towards my breaking point. It was as if my mother sensed my burgeoning rebellion and was determined to crush it. The first wave of escalation came in the form of even more impossible demands. My senior year was supposed to be about focusing on my studies, enjoying the last vestiges of my school life. Instead, my mother piled on chores with a vengeance. The house had to be spotless, meals had to be cooked to her exacting standards, and any slight deviation resulted in furious tirades. You're lazy, Melanie. Ungrateful. Do you have any idea how much I sacrifice for this family? She'd scream, her face contorted with rage. The truth was, she sacrificed nothing. She spent her days shopping, lunching with friends, or doting on Sarah, while I toiled away, my own dreams and needs completely ignored. My father, during his brief calls, would hear from her how helpful I was becoming, how I was finally maturing. The financial deception continued too. I knew she was still getting money from him for a cleaning service. She never hired money that went straight into her pocket or funded Sarah's expensive whims. The second wave hit my academic life hard. The constant exhaustion made it nearly impossible to concentrate in class or study effectively. My grades began to slip for the first time in my life. I'd sit in class fighting to keep my eyes open, the words on the page blurring together. Mrs. Bennett noticed. She'd look at me with concern, her brow furrowed. Melanie, are you all right? You seem exhausted. I wanted to confide in her, to pour out the years of misery, but fear held me back. Fear of my mother's retribution, fear of not being believed. The third wave was the increasing isolation. My mother seemed determined to cut me off from any potential source of support. She'd make excuses to prevent me from seeing the few friends I had, complaining about the bad influence they might have on me. She'd monitor my phone, my cries if I ever had one. The house became my prison, and she was the warden. Sarah, emboldened by my mother's intensified campaign against me, became more openly cruel. She'd mock me, call me Cinderella, and delight in reporting any perceived infraction to our mother. It was during this period of intense pressure that I started to wonder more about my mother's motivations. Why the deep-seated hatred for me? Why the obsession with my paternal grandmother? I knew she despised her, but the intensity of it felt almost pathological. I tried to glean information from snippets of conversations from old photo albums I found hidden in the attic. My father, when I cautiously probed, would become uncomfortable and evasive, clearly, still under my mother's influence regarding his own mother. He'd just say, "Your mother and grandmother, they just didn't get along, Melanie. It's complicated." But it felt like more than just not getting along. It felt like a vendetta, and I was somehow caught in the crossfire. My mother, Sharon, had a deeply insecure core, I suspected. Perhaps my resemblance to my paternal grandmother triggered some old wound, some rivalry or jealousy I couldn't fathom. Or maybe she was simply a narcissist who needed a scapegoat to feel powerful. The why, however, didn't lessen the pain of her actions. The fourth wave of escalation was a particularly vicious verbal assault that left me shaken to my core. I had forgotten to polish the silverware for a dinner party Mom was hosting for her friends, a minor oversight given the mountain of tasks I'd already completed. But for my mother, it was a declaration of war. "You useless, worthless child!" She shrieked, her voice echoing through the house. "You can't do one simple thing right. You're just like her, aren't you? Just like that wretched woman, your father's mother, always trying to undermine me to make me look bad." Her eyes blazed with a terrifying fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you, hiding in your books, thinking you're better than us? Well, you're nothing. Melanie, nothing." The words struck me like physical blows. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. I stood there trembling as her venomous words washed over me. This was the moment my breaking point truly arrived. I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. That's when the new opportunity, the lifeline, appeared. A few days after that horrible tirade, I was in Mrs. Bennet's history class. I was struggling to stay awake after being forced to clean the entire house until 3 a.m. the night before in preparation for another one of my mother's social events. I had a major history test that day, and I knew I was going to fail it. After class, Mrs. Bennet asked me to stay behind. "Melanie," she said gently, her eyes full of concern, "I'm worried about you. You're not yourself, and I know you're a brilliant student. Something is going on, isn't it?" Her kindness, her genuine concern, chipped away at the wall I had built around myself. The dam of years of suppressed pain finally broke. Tears streamed down my face as I choked out a fractured version of my life at home. The chores, the verbal abuse, the constant fear. Mrs. Bennet listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly grave. She didn't interrupt, just let me pour out my heart. When I finally finished, exhausted and trembling, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small, discreet device, a dictaphone. "Melanie," she said, her voice firm but compassionate, "this is a long shot and it might be dangerous, so you need to be very careful. But if what you're telling me is true, and I believe you, then you need evidence. Words can be denied, dismissed. But a recording is harder to ignore." She showed me how to use it, how to record conversations discreetly. "Record her, Melanie," she urged. "Record the threats, the abuse, especially if she ever talks about your father or his mother or the money. This could be your way out." A flicker of hope ignited within me, the first genuine hope I'd felt in years. It was terrifying, the thought of secretly recording my mother. If she found out, I didn't even want to imagine the consequences. But the alternative, continuing to live in this hell, was even more terrifying. My internal transformation was beginning. The scared, passive girl was slowly being replaced by someone desperate enough to fight back. Allies and enemies were now crystal clear. Mrs. Bennet was my ally, a courageous woman willing to stick her neck out for me. My mother, and by extension Sarah, and my maternal grandparents were the enemies I had to overcome. My father was still an unknown quantity, a pawn in my mother's game. But with evidence, perhaps he could be reached. Perhaps he could finally see the truth. The stakes were raised significantly. I was no longer just enduring. I was actively seeking to expose the truth. Every interaction with my mother became a tightrope walk, every chore a potential opportunity to gather the evidence I so desperately needed. The dictaphone became my secret weapon, a small piece of technology that held the key to my freedom. The cliffhanger came a week later. I'd managed to make several recordings of my mother's abusive tirades, her demeaning comments, her endless complaints about me. But then one evening, while she was on the phone with one of her friends, I overheard her say something that made my blood run cold. I fumbled for the dictaphone, my heart pounding in my chest, and managed to press record. She was laughing, a cruel, triumphant sound. And then she said it, the words that would change everything, the words that were the key to unraveling her entire web of lies. I had it. I had the truth on tape. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the storm, and the fallout would be bigger than I could ever imagine. The recording. It burned a hole in my pocket, a tiny device holding a truth so monumental it felt like it could shatter worlds. After my mother finished her call and went to watch TV with Sarah, I retreated to the relative sanctuary of my small, sparse bedroom. My hands trembled as I rewound the recording, my breath catching in my throat. I had to hear it again to be sure. There it was, my mother's voice clear as day, dripping with malice and self-satisfaction as she spoke to her friend, a woman I vaguely knew as one of her gossiping partners. "Oh, Carol, you wouldn't believe how easy it was to turn James against his mother. She was always so judgmental, so critical of me. Thought I wasn't good enough for her precious son, so I just nudged things along." A few well-placed comments here and there about how she was trying to break us up, how she was filling his head with nonsense about me. He's so trusting, James. Believes anything I say, especially when I cry a little. She chuckled a sound that made my stomach churn. And the money for the housekeeper. Please, James is so busy, he just transfers it. More for me and my Sarah, you know. Melanie, oh, she's good for something after all, doing all the work for free. She's so much like her. She spat the word with venom, referring to my paternal grandmother. It's almost a perverse pleasure to make her scrub the floors. It's like I'm punishing that old hag through her. The realization hit me like a freight train loaded with years of pain. It wasn't just random cruelty or a simple dislike. It was a calculated, systematic campaign of manipulation and revenge. She hadn't just alienated my father from his mother, she had boasted about it. She was stealing from him, openly admitting it. And my existence, my suffering, was a twisted form of punishment directed at a woman I barely knew, all because I had the misfortune of resembling her. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. But amidst the shards of pain, a cold, hard anger began to form, an anger that was empowering. My entire perspective shifted. I wasn't the flawed, unlovable child my mother had conditioned me to believe I was. I was a pawn in her sick game, a victim of her deep-seated malice and insecurity. The years of self-blame, of wondering what was wrong with me, evaporated, replaced by a searing clarity. She was the broken one, not me. The emotional processing was intense. I felt a maelstrom of emotions rage at her cruelty, profound sadness for my father who had been so callously deceived, a deep ache for the grandmother I never got to know, and a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. The abuse was real. Her hatred was real. And now I had proof. My internal monologue shifted from despair to determination. I will not let her destroy me. I will not let her win. This recording wasn't just evidence. It was my weapon, my shield, my key to freedom. The scared, timid Melanie was fading, replaced by a young woman with a will of steel. The decision to take action solidified in my mind. I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to expose her. My father needed to know the truth. He deserved to know how he'd been manipulated, how his own mother had been slandered, how his money was being misused, and how his youngest daughter was being systematically destroyed. The planning and preparation phase began immediately. I knew I couldn't confront my mother myself. She would twist everything, deny everything, and unleash her fury on me. I needed to get the recording to my father, but how? He was traveling, as usual. Emailing it felt too risky. My mother sometimes monitored his emails, or he might not grasp the severity of it from a digital file alone. I needed help. I needed Mrs. Bennet. The next day at school, I approached Mrs. Bennet, my heart pounding. I told her about the recording, about the horrifying confession. I played a small, crucial segment for her in the privacy of her office. Her face turned pale as she listened, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and grim determination. "Melanie," she said, her voice low and serious, This is beyond anything I imagined. This is the truth bomb you needed." She took a deep breath. "Your father needs to hear this, immediately." We discussed the best way to deliver the recordings. Mrs. Bennet, a true guardian angel, offered to help. She had a contact, a trusted colleague, whose husband was a lawyer. They could help ensure the recordings reached my father securely and with the necessary impact. She also suggested I make copies of the recordings, keeping one hidden in a safe place. Over the next few days, we meticulously planned our strategy. Mrs. Bennet helped me transfer the audio files from the dictaphone to a USB drive. We decided she would try to contact my father through a more official channel, perhaps through the lawyer, to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation before he even spoke to my mother. The plan was for him to receive the recordings while he was still away on his business trip, so he could listen to them objectively away from my mother's manipulative presence. The anticipation for the confrontation was immense, a knot of fear and excitement tightening in my stomach. I continued to go through the motions at home, cleaning, cooking, enduring my mother's barbs, all the while knowing that her reign of terror was about to end. I felt like a spy in my own home, guarding a secret that held the power to detonate our carefully constructed family facade. Every time my mother looked at me with her usual contempt, I had to fight the urge to smirk to tell her that her time was up. Little did they know I had been documenting everything. The truth would soon come to light in the most unexpected way. The stage was set. The fuse was lit. All we had to do was wait for the explosion. And I prayed with every fiber of my being that when the dust settled, I would finally be free. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my room, ostensibly doing homework, but actually staring at the ceiling, my nerves stretched taut. My mother was downstairs humming as she arranged flowers for yet another one of her ladies who lunch gatherings. Sarah was out with friends. The house was deceptively calm. My phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. I answered, my voice a shaky whisper. "Hello, Melanie, it's your father." His voice was strained heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't his usual cheerful, slightly distant tone. This was different, raw. "Dad, are you okay?" I've listened to them, Melanie. The recordings, Mrs. Bennet. She got them to me. All of them." There was a long pause. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm coming home. Now, I'm on my way from the airport." My blood ran cold, then hot. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "Dad, Don't say anything, honey, not now, just stay strong, I'll be there in an hour." He hung up. An hour. It felt like an eternity. I sat on my bed, trembling, a strange mixture of terror and elation coursing through me. He knew. He finally knew. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway an hour later was like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence of my anticipation. I heard the front door open, his heavy footsteps in the hall. My mother, surprised by his unexpected return, called out in her saccharine voice, "James, darling, what a surprise! You're home early." I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw him then, my father. He looked different, older. His face was pale. His eyes, usually bright with entrepreneurial zeal, were now dark, haunted, and filled with a cold, hard anger I had never seen before. He was holding his phone in his hand, his knuckles white. "Sharon," he said, his voice low and dangerous, cutting through her false cheer. "We need to talk." My mother's smile faltered. "Talk about what, darling? Is everything all right?" She tried to reach for his arm, but he recoiled as if she were venomous. "Don't touch me," he hissed. And then he pressed a button on his phone. My mother's voice filled the living room, her voice from the recording. the cruel laughter, the boasting about manipulating him, about slandering his mother, the confession about stealing his money, the venomous words about me, about making me scrub floors as a perverse punishment. My mother froze. The color drained from her face, replaced by a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror. She stared at the phone in my father's hand as if it were a viper. "James, I don't know what that is. It's fake Melanie. She's always been a troublemaker trying to turn you against me," she stammered, her eyes darting wildly around, searching for an escape. My father's face was like stone. "Fake Sharon, I recognize your voice. I recognize your lies. Years of lies." He played another segment, one of her screaming at me, calling me worthless just like his mother. "And this Sharon is this fake too. My daughter, my Melanie, being treated like this in her own home." His voice rose, shaking with fury. "And my mother. You destroyed my relationship with my own mother. You told me she was evil, that she hated you, hated us. And all along it was you." At that moment, I felt like my entire identity crumbled, only to be rebuilt on a foundation of truth. My father knew. He believed me. The power dynamic in the room had completely irrevocably shifted. My mother, who had always been in control, the puppet master pulling everyone's strings, was now exposed vulnerable, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "James, please." She whimpered, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the crocodile tears she usually employed to manipulate him. These were tears of desperation of a cornered animal. I made mistakes. I was unhappy, stressed. "Mistakes," my father thundered. "You call systematically abusing our daughter, stealing from me, and poisoning my mind against my own family mistakes. This isn't a mistake, Sharon. This is who you are." I slowly descended the stairs, drawn into the vortex of the confrontation. My father saw me, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pain and regret in his eyes, before hardening again as he looked back at my mother. My mother saw me too, and her eyes for a moment held pure, unadulterated hatred. You did this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You ungrateful little witch! After everything I've done for you, done for me." I found my voice surprisingly steady. "You've done nothing for me, Mother. You've only ever taken from me. My childhood, my spirit, my father's love." My father stepped in front of me, shielding me. "Enough, Sharon. Not another word against her." He turned to her, his voice cold and final. "I'm divorcing you, and I'm taking full custody of Melanie. We're leaving. Today. Now." My mother let out a strangled sob, collapsing onto the pristine sofa she cared more about than her own daughter. Her meltdown was epic. She screamed, she cried, she begged, she threatened. But my father was resolute. He had heard the undeniable truth in her own voice. The recordings were the irrefutable witnesses. Sarah chose that moment to walk in back from her outing, oblivious. She took in the scene, our mother hysterical, our father looking like a thundercloud, me standing there strangely calm. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. My father looked at her, his expression weary. "Your mother hasn't been honest with us, Sarah, about a lot of things." He didn't elaborate further then, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "Sarah Ever." Her mother's daughter rushed to Sharon's side. "Daddy, what did you do to Mom? Why is she crying?" she demanded, glaring at him, then at me. It was clear whose side she was on. My father ignored her outburst. He turned to me. "Melanie, go pack a bag, just the essentials. We'll get the rest later." I nodded, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees, washing over me. It was happening. I was finally getting out. As I went upstairs, I could hear my mother's wails, her desperate attempts to salvage the situation, to manipulate my father one last time. But her power was broken. The truth had set me free, and it had also finally opened my father's eyes. Justice wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal, and my mother was choking on every course. Her public humiliation wouldn't be in a courtroom filled with strangers, not immediately. It would be the quiet, devastating destruction of her image in the eyes of the one person she thought she'd always control, my father. And the news of her deceit I knew would spread like wildfire through our extended family and her carefully curated social circle. Her reign was over. My moment of triumph wasn't loud or vengeful. It was a quiet internal liberation. The heavy chains of guilt and worthlessness that had bound me for so long shattered and fell away. As I packed my bag, I felt lighter than I had in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it felt like my own. Leaving that house with my father felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into blinding sunlight. The immediate consequences of the confrontation were swift and decisive. My father, true to his word, didn't hesitate. We packed a few essential belongings, leaving behind the opulent cage where I had spent so much of my life in servitude. My mother's wails and Sarah's bewildered accusations faded behind us as we drove away. The silence in the car was thick, heavy with unspoken emotions, but it wasn't the oppressive silence I was used to. This was a silence of transition, of a new beginning. My father drove straight to my paternal grandmother's house. It was a modest, cozy little place a world away from the sterile grandeur of our former home. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since I was a very small child. My mother's poison had worked effectively, severing that bond completely. I was nervous, unsure what to expect. My grandmother opened the door, her eyes so much like mine widening in surprise, then filling with tears as she saw my father and then me. James Melanie. Her voice was soft, laced with a gentle tremor. My father, his face etched with remorse, simply said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have known." She embraced him tightly, and then she turned to me. She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze searching, and then she pulled me into a warm, comforting hug. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never known. "Oh, my dear child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You look so much like I remember, and so much like I imagined." That evening, my father, my grandmother, and I sat together in her cozy living room. My father, with my permission, played some of the recordings for her. The pain on her face as she heard my mother's venomous words about her, the calculated cruelty, was immense. But there was also a profound sense of vindication. She confirmed everything: my mother's long-standing manipulative behavior, her jealousy, her systematic efforts to isolate James from his family. "She was always like that, James," my grandmother said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "So charming on the surface, but so twisted inside. I tried to warn you, but she was too clever." The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, painting a complete picture of my mother's destructive personality. It was a painful, cathartic evening, filled with tears, apologies, and the tentative first steps towards rebuilding a family shattered by deceit. My mother predictably didn't take her downfall lying down. In the days that followed, she launched a campaign of damage control. She called my father incessantly, leaving tearful, then angry, then pleading voicemails. She tried to contact me, sending messages filled with false apologies, accusations, and attempts to guilt-trip me. "How could you do this to your own mother, Melanie? After all I've sacrificed for you, you're tearing this family apart." But her words had lost their power. My father, his eyes now wide open, handled her calls with a newfound firmness. He instructed a lawyer to manage all communication regarding the divorce and custody arrangements. I, with my father's support, blocked her number. I was done being her victim. I set firm boundaries, refusing to engage with her manipulative tactics. It was empowering to finally say no to protect myself. Sarah sadly remained firmly entrenched in my mother's camp. She called me a few times, her voice laced with anger and confusion. "Mom is a wreck because of you. You've ruined everything," she accused. I tried to explain to make her see the truth, but she refused to listen, parroting my mother's narrative of betrayal and misunderstanding. It hurt losing my sister, even though our relationship had always been strained. But I realized I couldn't force her to see what she wasn't willing to see. My maternal grandparents also showed their true colors. They called my father not to inquire about my well-being, but to defend my mother, to accuse him of being cruel and hasty. My father, disgusted by their complicity and their continued blindness to my mother's abuse, cut ties with them as well. The lines were drawn clearly and irrevocably. Support came from unexpected and some expected quarters. Mrs. Bennet was a rock. She checked in on me regularly, offering words of encouragement and support. Knowing she believed in me, that she had risked her own comfort to help me, meant the world. Some of my father's old friends who had been subtly pushed away by my mother over the years reached out to him, offering their support and expressing their relief that he was finally free from her influence. The truth about my mother's character began to ripple through our community, not through salacious gossip, but through the quiet, steady dissemination of facts. Her carefully crafted facade was crumbling, and her social standing, which she valued so highly, took a significant hit. This was the public humiliation I had once only dreamed of for her. Not a spectacle, but a quiet, deserved erosion of her false image. The short-term changes in my life were immense. I moved in with my father and grandmother. Her house was small, but it was filled with warmth, love, and a sense of peace I had never experienced before. I started therapy with a kind, insightful therapist named Dr. Martinez, whom my father found for me. There were so many years of trauma to unpack, so much emotional baggage to sort through, but for the first time I felt safe enough to begin the healing process. Emotionally, I was a strange mix of relief, grief, and tentative hope. Relief that the abuse was over, that I was finally free. Grief for the lost years, for the childhood I never had, for the mother I wished I had. And hope for the future, a future where I could finally be myself, pursue my dreams, and build healthy, loving relationships. The victory was sweet, but it was also tinged with the sadness of what had been. Yet as I looked at my father, truly seeing him for the first time as a protector and ally, and felt the genuine love of my grandmother, I knew I was on the right path. The path to healing, to wholeness, to a life where I was not invisible, but seen cherished and free. Karma didn't just come for my mother, it brought an entire army of consequences, and justice was finally blessedly mine. 3 years. 3 years can feel like a lifetime when you're emerging from darkness into light. And for me, those 3 years were a period of profound transformation, of rebuilding, of finally blooming into the person I was always meant to be. I graduated high school with honors, my passion for history reignited, no longer stifled by exhaustion and fear. Mrs. Bennet was there at my graduation, cheering louder than anyone. I got into my dream university, the one out of state, the one my mother had tried to sabotage. My father, with tears in his eyes, co-signed my application and financial aid forms, this time his pride in me palpable. Studying history became my sanctuary, my way of understanding the world and my own place in it. I excelled, made Dean's List every semester, and even got to assist one of my professors with research, a testament to how far I'd come. My life was unrecognizable from the one I'd led under my mother's tyrannical rule. I lived in a dorm at first, then a small apartment near campus with a roommate who became a dear friend. I learned to cook for myself, not as a chore, but as an act of self-care. I joined clubs, made friends who valued me for who I was, and even tentatively started dating. The anxiety that had once been my constant companion slowly receded, replaced by a quiet confidence I never thought I'd possess. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, played a huge role in this. Our sessions were my safe space to process the trauma, to unlearn the toxic messages my mother had ingrained in me, and to build healthy coping mechanisms. She helped me understand that what happened was not my fault, and that I deserved happiness and love. And what of the antagonists in my story? Well, karma didn't just come for them, it brought an entire army. My mother, Sharon, did not fare well. The divorce was messy, but the recordings of her confessions, her financial deceit, her admission of parental alienation, significantly weakened her case. She didn't get the lavish settlement she expected. She had to sell the big suburban house the stage for her years of cruelty. Her social circle, once so important to her, dwindled. The truth about her treatment of me and her manipulation of my father spread, and many of her so-called friends distanced themselves. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment, bitter and isolated, still trying to play the victim, but finding fewer and fewer people willing to listen. Justice wasn't just served. It was a 5-course meal, and she was left with the scraps. Sarah, my sister, initially remained loyal to my mother. She struggled, caught between her loyalty and the slow dawning realization of our mother's true nature. After a couple of years of minimal contact, she reached out to me, tentatively at first. She had started therapy herself, trying to untangle the unhealthy dynamics she'd grown up in. Our relationship is still a work in progress, fragile and new, but there's a flicker of hope that we might one day have a genuine connection, free from the poison of our mother's making. She admitted that she saw our mother for who she was, and the pain and disillusionment in her voice were palpable. My maternal grandparents, after their initial defense of my mother, became increasingly estranged. My father maintained his distance, and I had no desire to reconnect with people who had stood by and watched me suffer. They were a sad footnote in a chapter of my life I was determined to leave behind. The family dynamics on my father's side, however, were completely transformed. My relationship with my father blossomed. He was no longer the absent, oblivious parent. He was present, supportive, and deeply remorseful for his past blindness. We talked for hours, rebuilding our bond brick by brick. He became my biggest cheerleader, my confidant, my rock, and my paternal grandmother. She became the grandmother I'd always dreamed of. Her home was my haven. She taught me about her life, about our family history, about resilience and forgiveness for myself mostly. She filled the void of maternal love I had carried for so long. We baked together, gardened, and she'd tell me stories, her eyes twinkling with warmth and wisdom. Professionally, I was thriving. After university, I landed an internship at a renowned historical society, a dream come true. Personally, I was learning to trust, to love, to build healthy relationships. I was no longer the invisible girl, the household drudge. I was Melanie, strong, resilient, and finally truly free. Reflecting on my journey, the lessons learned are manifold. I learned about the insidious nature of emotional abuse, the importance of speaking out even when it's terrifying. I learned that true strength isn't about never falling, but about rising each time you do. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and support. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from toxic relationships, even if they involve the people who are supposed to love you most. In the end, the truth didn't just set me free. It rebuilt me stronger, piece by piece, into someone I was proud to be. What goes around doesn't just come around, it multiplies. And the seeds of kindness and truth I'd clung to had finally borne fruit in abundance. My story is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of circumstances, hope can survive. The journey was long and arduous, filled with pain and betrayal, but it led me to a place of peace, strength, and self-love I never thought possible. The deep moral of my story, if I had to distill it, is multifaceted. It's about the devastating impact of hidden abuse, but also about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's about the courage it takes to confront your abusers and reclaim your narrative. It's about understanding that you are not defined by the darkness inflicted upon you, but by the light you choose to seek and nurture within yourself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to fight for your voice to be heard? What steps did you take? Or what steps do you dream of taking to reclaim your power? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a community of support and understanding. If you've ever been the forgotten child, or if you know someone who is, drop a comment and subscribe. Share this story if you believe every child deserves equal love, recognition, and the chance to thrive. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to hear more stories of triumph, over adversity, of healing, and of the incredible strength found in vulnerability. My most profound lesson is this: your self-worth is inherent. It cannot be diminished by anyone else's cruelty or blindness. You are worthy of love, respect, and happiness simply because you exist. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. I'm still on my journey, still learning and growing, but I face the future with an open heart and a resilient spirit. I invite you to join this community. We're building a space for shared experiences, healing, and empowerment. I'll be sharing more of my journey and other stories of hope and resilience in the future. Thank you for listening. Your strength inspires me as I hope my story inspires you.